The laws of the Hebrew slave. Free for marriage. I read from Exodus chapter 21, verse 2 to 4. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he is to serve you for 6 years, but in the 7th year he shall go free, without paying anything. If he comes alone, he is to go free alone. But if he has a wife when he comes, she is to go with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons and daughters, the woman and her children shall belong to her master, and only the man shall go free. Something here seems to contradict the will of Yahuwah regarding marriage. The order according to which they leave father and mother to become one flesh seems to contradict the law cited here. Marriage is a threefold union, a covenant between man, woman, and Yahuwah. How can a third human party have anything to do in such an institution? Did he have a wife when he entered? Let her live with him. The marriage having been sealed outside his service at the master's house, this one has no right in this union. But if he married during his stay at the master's house, it then could only happen with the agreement of the latter. In this case, he has a say in their relationship. Thus the wife and any children resulting from this alliance also belong to him. A similar situation appears in the case of the dead brother, when the Jew has the duty to generate offspring for his deceased brother and must sleep with his sister-in-law by taking her as a wife, in order to make her pregnant, in the case the deceased brother did not have children with his wife. Here also, the child resulting from such a union is not attributed to his biological father, but is considered the son of the deceased one. The Hebrew slave was someone who had made a mistake, having stumbled and thus lost his fortune and all the goods he owned. The institution of slavery was an opportunity for him to get back on his feet and start a new life. He was given the opportunity to be hosted by someone where work, food, and shelter were assured for him and his family. He therefore had a job, he had bread and a roof for a period of 6 years, during which he could raise the necessary funds in order to start a new life at the end of this period. The master was not a slaver, and the slave was not a slave in the sense we know it today in our feudalistic-rooted regions. It was rather a servant to whom the service of not being thrown out into the street or even from among the people was granted to him. The master was a member of the people, on whom the blessing of Yahuwah was visible and who had enough goods to be able to share with others, not for free, but in exchange for well-defined work. It was practically a duty to help those who had paid their debt to the society, but had nothing left in order to prevent them from continuing their decline and finding themselves on the street, or even worse, banished from the people. A single man finding himself in such a crisis situation must be careful not to want to get married when he does not even have the means to provide for his own needs. His only goal in such a situation must mainly be to regain his autonomy and freedom. Let him just limit himself to raising the funds necessary to be able to start a new life and be later able to found a family. But if despite everything, he cannot hold on without a partner even during this period of 6 years, so let it be, let him get married. Yahuwah does not forbid marriage, even in these cases. But he must know that as long as he is not free, he himself does not belong entirely to Yahuwah. Thus any alliance made between non-free persons will also remain under the power of the man to whom the spouses belong. This law is nothing other than security, in order to prevent people unsuitable for marriage from uniting unconsciously. This law is still in effect today in the Messiah. When we search for a soulmate as young, newly converted and born-again believers, we must ask ourselves the question before Yahuwah whether or not we are fit to marry. Are we completely free, or do we still have ties to our past? Are we still under the yoke of the family, of our dear mother, of our ancient traditions, as religious they may be? Do we still have our good ideas to which we cling, our tastes which we would not get rid of for anything in the world? In a word, has the transfer of power to the hands of the Messiah been complete in all areas of our lives? Can we wait, or do we instead give way to the hormones that are raging within us? How free we are from our own expectations, because we have a very precise idea of how our companion should be, inside and out. How many degrees should he or she have, and what should his or her culinary or musical taste be? Because a hasty union can have very serious consequences. An alliance under the yoke of a foreign power always brings an avalanche of problems. Indeed, the master, who in this case is not a brother from our people who gives his helping hand to us, but an evil spirit, wanting and knowing how to do us harm, will not fail to assert his rights over such a couple. He will do anything to destroy and reduce this union to ashes. The best will in the world can motivate our act, wanting to fulfill one of the fundamental laws of Yahuwah, but a hasty union will be a path strewn with pitfalls for us. Of course, grace can be obtained in such circumstances as well, because Yahuwah forgives our faults committed unconsciously. It is therefore possible to implore liberation from the clutches of the false masters who hold us hostage, to emerge free and purified, like the Jewish people delivered from the hands of Pharaoh. But it is better to take precautions and heed the warnings offered to us, particularly through the law. Voluntary subjection. I go on reading in Exodus chapter 21, verses 5 to 6. But if the servant declares, I love my master and my wife and children, and do not want to go free, then his master must take him before the judges. He shall take him to the door, or the doorpost, and pierce his ear with an awl. Then he will be his servant for life. Wearing earrings is a pagan tradition which is very foreign to Jewish thought. As with tattooing, all current forms of piercing are none other than the skin-deep seals of idols and foreign spiritual currents which govern those who wear them. Many voluntarily carry on themselves the labels of the demons that govern them. Skulls, snakes, scorpions, spiders, and other creatures prefigure and prepare the world for the arrival of the beast in a sort of advent of the Antichrist. Elohim never forces anyone. He goes so far as to allow us to choose something other than him or the freedom that he offers us. You get aware that you need salvation from this fallen world, then you get a chance to catch up and start all over again by being evangelized by the member of a certain church or assembly. This rehabilitation is a pre-established process with its precise stages. But if you still decide to act differently, if you want to be content with what you have during your rehabilitation and remain under the power of a man or a church, you have the right to do so. But you should know that you will be nothing more than a ringed bird that will never be able to fly by its own wings again. You will not have a ministry, and your wife and children will not be yours in the spiritual sense. You will remain a simple worker in the service of someone else whom you will help in a ministry that will never be yours. This is how many believers find themselves stuck under the power of the pastor, the preacher, or any community and churches. In the best case, the latter are themselves the faithful disciples of the one and only shepherd, because then your life as a believer will not be entirely in vain. You will be a good assistant to their ministries, which will have their seeds, but you will not enjoy their fruits. By choosing this path, you will never accomplish the work that Yahuwah wanted you to do. He will thus be obliged to find other servants who have chosen freedom in order to accomplish the mission that should have been yours. I knew a man who found himself in a very difficult situation after being born again. He was in fact married to an unbelieving woman. His marriage was sealed under a foreign yoke before his conversion. His marriage thus found itself in danger. He said he couldn't bear it if his wife would leave him. After a time, the woman remained in the initial spiritual state without any positive change in the sense of faith. The man disappeared and was never seen again. He abandoned the path of disciple, undoubtedly to put an end to domestic conflicts in order to preserve his marriage. A similar thing happened to him. His relationship with the woman was more important than his spiritual freedom. He returned to his former master, where he had his earlobe pierced, so that everything would continue as before. He may not have denied the Messiah, but he did deny his power. He was unable to wait for the outcome and accept a possible divorce or the conversion of his wife, although there was nothing to suggest that she would one day submit to the divine will. He did not have faith that Yahuwah could perform the miracle of converting his wife or freeing him from the lack of her if separation would have happened after what he possibly could have been given someone else instead of her. According to the commandment of the Messiah, he acted well by not abandoning his unbelieving wife so that she could be sanctified through her spouse. But the fact he disappeared and abandoned all contact with his brothers and sisters in spirit is a problem which is depicted by this commandment. Slaves of churches and assemblies. But it is clear that the most important message that this law conveys to us is the phenomenon that we can observe in churches and assemblies and that we just discussed a few seconds ago. Maintaining a state of spiritual infantilism is not only the sin of the illegitimate slave traders. Just as there are no macros without prostitutes, only the person under whom people are consciously willing to take refuge and accept their spiritual authority is capable of controlling others. Whether they do it of self-interest or spiritual weakness, it doesn't change a thing. Being under the supervision of a teacher, a pastor, or a spiritual father is necessary until one passes from death to life and then into adulthood. Conversion, rebirth, process of sanctification. All this is symbolically included in these 6 years of slavery in the good sense. In the visible world, even according to the timeline of physical time, no one should ever exceed this time frame and limit. It is not normal for people to continue to be spiritually dependent on other men and never become fathers and teachers to others themselves. After these 6 symbolic years, which in the visible world should represent a much shorter period of time, people should continue their path in freedom and independence. In short, people who languish in churches, who never become spiritual fathers, mothers themselves, who live off the sermons of the same teachers for years, may not even realize that in their minds they went through the final implementation of this law, the one that is not recommended, but still being an option. By accepting the spiritual authority of a pastor, teacher, or other spiritual father in a fixed and indeterminate way, their ears have been pierced, and many have thus chosen the state of permanent slavery. The good news, although, is that Yeshua, if you already know him, can still get you out of this type of slavery as well. If your eyes end up being opened through this law that speaks to us even today, so that you finally recognize in what spiritual state you are. If you are still in this kind of situation, rush to pray, rush to fast, and ask forgiveness for your weakness. Renew your conscience and surrender yourself definitively and completely to the power of your Master, your one and only legitimate owner, the Shepherd Yahushua. And then set foot on the water and finally start to walk by yourself.